why don't they deploy, besides the aspect that they are taking care of the other side? Why they don't deploy more to the Kursk region? Because there are civilians who are truly suffering at this point.
This is one of the political problems facing Russia. Abdialadanov, who is a Chechen a general in the Russian Ministry of Defense, a major general, he's the commander of the Akhmat Special Forces, one of the units that was sent to deal with this incursion, has said that the Russian Defense Ministry had lied to itself so often about Kursk that it began to believe its lies. They were woefully unprepared for what the Ukrainians did. But Abdi also said that, it was very difficult. It's less difficult now. They've got the situation under control. He said, one of his concerns before the Kursk operation was that even though Russia was winning dramatically in the Donbass, and he expects that the war was going to come to an end this year, and he continues to believe that, he said, I don't know about the reserves. I mean, they've got this significant 20,000 strong reserve, maybe more, with, modern equipment. They've been trained by the British, the Americans, the Germans, and we can't bring this war to an end until we deal with that reserve. And he said the Ukrainians have solved the problem for us. They gave us the reserves. So even though Kursk is a political embarrassment, understand this: the troops that Ukraine has committed to Kursk are stuck in Kursk. For them to move, they have to get on roads and be exposed to drone attacks, artillery attacks, air attacks. They'll be depleted. They're stuck in Kursk, which isn't doing anything for the main objective. Now, for Russia, Ukraine, one of the reasons why Ukraine went into Kursk was to divert Russian resources to Kursk to take pressure off of other things. Russia has reserves. By some accounts, these reserves may add up to more than 200,000 troops that are uncommitted but available. These reserves are, designed to do something. Right now, Russia is seeking the collapse of the Ukrainian army in the Donbass region, in Donetsk, and they're achieving that. I mean, every day the Ukrainians are just retreating faster and faster and faster and faster. And now they've denied themselves the ability to use their strategic reserve because they're trapped in Kursk, so this collapse will even be more precipitous. When that collapse occurs, there will be an opportunity, a window of opportunity for Russia to exploit the chaos that's going to ensue, to either capture Kharkov, the city, capture Sumy, or make a move on Odessa, or both. We don't know. But that option for the rapid exploitation of Ukrainian collapse goes away if you take those troops and you put them up in Kursk, because now Ukraine has won. Because what are the Russians going to achieve? They're going to drive the Ukrainians out of Kursk, but the offensive that they've expended all this time and effort on will have stalled, and it'll give Ukraine a chance to reconstitute its defenses. Russia has put a lot of time, effort, and blood into this offensive. And one of the things about an offensive of this nature is that it is designed to use attrition, continuous attrition, as a mechanism to wear the Ukrainians down to where they collapse. Continuous attrition. That means that the Ukrainians get no rest, that when they retreat, the Russians are right on them. And then they get destroyed, they retreat again, the Russians are right on them. And that pressure is maintained up until it's time the Ukrainians can no longer sustain a cohesive front, and they retreat. This requires continuous pressure. This means that the Russians can't let up on their offensive. And if you remove the resources necessary to sustain this offensive by diverting them to Kursk, then the Ukrainians have succeeded in their objective of stalling this defense. Then they can bring up, 5 more brigades, which they've been training, to throw them into the line and stabilize, hope for other things. And if they stop the Russian offensive, that brings confidence back into Europe and the United States, who right now are looking at the situation saying, Ukraine's lost this war. Do we really want to pour more money, more effort, more resources into that we don't have? Germany's saying we don't have any more money to give. And the rest of Europe's pretty much coming to that same conclusion. In the United States, there's a debate, it's a political debate. how much to continue to give Ukraine. If Ukraine is just losing, and if the only way to prevent Ukraine from losing is to engage in a general nuclear war with Russia, that's not an attractive offer. Maybe it's time for the world to say, Ukraine, you have to end this conflict. Ukraine doesn't want to end this conflict on those terms. So these are acts of desperation. But the Russians, I think, are focused on achieving their strategic objective, the demilitarization of Ukraine. That occurs by killing Ukrainian soldiers. Right now, they're slaughtering them in Kursk. They're slaughtering them in the Donbass. Even though it's politically embarrassing what's happening in Kursk from a military standpoint, it's actually not that bad. They've contained the problem. And in doing so, they have nullified the Ukrainian strategic reserve. It's not going to do anything more than occupy land on a temporary basis in Russia. They will, if they stay there, they will all die. They're not able to affect the battlefield in the Donbass. They can't launch a counteroffensive at Kursk. From the Russian perspective, politically embarrassing, militarily, it actually enhances their victory, because now they've solved the issue of what do we do about the Ukrainian strategic reserve. The Ukrainians solved that by committing it into the Kursk fight.
Is this really psychological warfare?
Well, I mean, I don't want to put too much attention on that, because that detracts from the fact that this is about killing people. We can play mind games all we want, but at the end of the day, the Russian victory is based upon attritional warfare. That means that the Russians are killing people in larger numbers than those people are killing Russians. There's a lot of people dying right now in the Donbass on both sides. There's a lot of people dying in Kursk on both sides. So to say it's psychological warfare implies that somehow that this is more about, intellectual maneuverings. No, this is about men waking up every morning and going out to kill other men in the most horrible ways possible. This is a very, very bloody war. And I think that it's important that people understand that the psychological warfare aspect of it is more for a domestic audience to appease observers of the conflict. But for the people on the front line fighting, there ain't nothing psychological about it. It's purely physical.
Thank you, Scott. It was my mistake.
No, it's not a mistake. I'm not correcting you. I just don't want people to forget that war is about killing.
Of course, absolutely. But I want to ask you a very maybe different question, very general question. Do you think, is there anything that Russia is afraid of?
Afraid of?
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that Russia's concerned. Look, you've been to Russia. I think we in the West sometimes lose touch with the fact that Russia is a very religious country, both in terms of their embrace of orthodoxy, Russian Orthodoxy, which is now a defining characteristic of the Russian nation, and of Islam. I mean, we cannot discount the Chechens, the Ingush, the Dagestanis, the Tatars. A significant percentage of the population of the Russian Federation are Muslim, but not in the Wahhabist sense. These are deeply religious people of faith, and they attach their faith to the Russian Federation. These are people who have come to grips with the notion that this conflict in Ukraine is of an existential nature, good versus evil. And they identify the Russian Federation as being on the side of good. And people of faith, when dealing with existential issues, are more at peace with the prospect of death than other people. The Russians aren't suicidal. You know this. They love life. They want life. But when the Russian government says that there can't be a world without Russia, he means just that. That Russia is one of the major civilizations of the world, and the West's effort to eradicate Russia, to destroy it, to break it up, as many people have openly bragged about wanting to do, the world will not live if that is indeed the outcome that they seek, that Russia will defend itself to the death. And with nuclear weapons, it means that to the death means everybody will die. And as Vladimir Putin says, he understands the consequences, but he says, we will go to heaven as martyrs, and you will go elsewhere. So I don't see the Russian people afraid. I think that they have transformed their country into something that is, from their perspective, a wonderful place to live. I happen to share much of that perspective. It is indeed a wonderful place to live. They are very proud, rightfully so, of their traditions, their culture, their history, and they are confident in their place in the world. They have stopped being self-defined second-class citizens. They no longer look to the West in admiration and say, oh gosh, I wish I were like them. They're proud of who they are. They've become their own. And I think this confidence allows them to stand up to the West and say, we will not bend our knees. And if the consequences of this will be a massive conflict, again, they know their history. We're talking about a nation that suffered 27 million dead as part, they're part of the Soviet Union at the time that suffered 27 million dead. And every one of those deaths, whether they, we can call them Soviet, but the Russian Federation, the citizens of the Russian Federation respect every single one of those deaths as a death of their, of their history. So even though you have Ukrainians saying Ukrainians died, the Russians will say, but they died in the cause of defending Mother Russia, not just the Russian Republic, but the entire entity of the Soviet Union, which was largely a Russian entity. The psychology of a nation that has already sacrificed 27 million to defend itself is different from other nations which have not, including the United States. While we suffered 300 and 400,000 dead during World War II, our people weren't touched like the Russian people were. We don't understand existential conflict. And so therefore we sometimes tend to say, oh, well, the Russians won't take it to the end. The Russians are bluffing. I will tell you that based upon my experience in Russia, they're not bluffing. The Russian government isn't bluffing. The Russian military isn't bluffing. And the Russian people aren't bluffing. They like who they are, and they're willing to defend who they are to the death.